Hey guys, I just wanted to finally do my review for Captain America Civil War. I guess you've probably seen other reviews, you've heard about the reviews. The movie finally addresses stuff like the collateral damage from past assignments from Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and other Avengers assignments, including from Avengers and Age of Ultron, as well as a mission that Cap and his new Avengers team, which included, Black Panther, not Black Panther, Black Widow, Scarlet Witch, and Falcon, on a mission in Lagos, Nigeria, that results in even more collateral damage, and it ultimately becomes the last straw for world governments, as why the United Nations has drafted something called the Sokovia Accords, in which they would act as a governing body for the Avengers, and the Avengers would essentially be working for them, and then they would be go on assignments, and then the UN would be calling the shots, and of course, Tony feels bad about it because he feels responsible for the death and destruction that was caused by Ultron, and Captain America's against it because of his past experiences. Even though War Machine points out, this is not like they're dealing with the world. It's not like they're dealing with the World Security Council or Shield or Hydra. And Steve says no, but they're people with agendas, and agendas change. And Tony thinks that this was a long time coming. It's inevitable, and they're better off taking the path least resistance, which is why even the Vision, and even to the shock of Sam Wilson and Steve Rogers, that Black Widow decides to side with Tony. And of course that leads to this whole schism with the Avengers, in which even like Bucky is brought back into the picture, and eventually he becomes a fugitive. And eventually, because even though the events of the movie are being slightly manipulated by a third party, and it's why Bucky's being brought back into the mix, it's also why it basically leads to this whole schism among the Avengers, and why Cap goes on the run trying to protect Bucky, and Tony and his Avengers are tasked for bringing him in. And the thing about it is that it did live up to a lot of my expectations. It was better than the comic book, in which it turned Tony Stark into a straight up villain, like unsympathetic villain, for the plot to work. And he did have his moments too. He still had his moments of being unsympathetic, and I'll get into it later in the spoiler portion of the review, but it essentially he was basically much more sympathetic here. I definitely could understand both sides, even though I still found myself siding with Team Cap more, just because it leaned more in his favor for most of the movie. And people complaining about, is it going to be a Captain America movie, or is it going to be an Avengers movie? It managed to be both. It wasn't like Batman v Superman was trying to be like a Batman movie and a Superman movie, but was being uneven or indecisive about it, and also be a setup for other movies. And it felt like it dealt with a lot of the more political ideologies, or some of the ideas that were presented in that movie, which I've become less fond of the more I think about it, and it was probably a little too easy on my review, that it wasn't this movie, like collateral damage, who should be held an accountability. And you also could really understand why these two people, even without the third party manipulation, you can understand why especially Tony and Steve butting heads the way they do in this movie. And And of course, Black Panther is a great character. He totally steals the show. He's kind of like the more like, even though he has a, I mean, even though he has his own agenda for siding with Iron Man's team and going after Bucky, he still ends up ultimately being the one of the more like level-headed people, one of the more level-headed people, heroes in the end of the conflict. And of course, Spider-Man, I gotta say, Tom Holland, as much as I thought, this is not a knock on the other actors, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. Gotta say, Tom Holland is the best, like, definitive Spider-Man, like, we are, like, brought to screen. Like, with his excessive nerdiness, the usual banter during the battles with people, which other heroes kept pointing out and were getting annoyed by, which is typical Spider-Man. Um, he he's just damn near perfect. And at first I was like indifferent to being recast because I was happy with Andrew Garfield because I felt like he embodied more of both um, Peter Parker and Spider-Man with the wittier banter as opposed to Tobey Maguire, who was just a good Peter Parker, not a great Spider-Man because he was very mopey and didn't really crack a lot of jokes. Here, he just, I feel like he's just Tom Holland managed to be like the quintessential Spider-Man, and which is great. Um, and I just loved the whole, and yeah, basically, it's not even like, and also the fight at the airport scene was just fantastic. It was just like straight out of the comic book, straight out of something I'd be seeing in like, I don't know, Avengers versus X-Men or even the original Civil War comic. It was just basically just stuff your face full of popcorn, like one of the best action scenes, one of the most over the comic booky, like stuff your face full of popcorn action scenes put to film. And it's definitely like the one of the best parts of the movie. But even like the fight, even like the three-way fight between Tony, Cap, and Bucky in a way was um, even enjoyed it. It was even like a better fight just because it was smaller in scale and you can tell like everybody's motivations in that. It was far more visceral and some level. And I mean, like I said, you just get why they're just kind of butting heads. But I mean, it's hard to like talk about this movie without getting into spoilers. So I'll just give you guys a time to, you know, jump to this. This is the point where I'm going to get into the spoilers now, and then go talk about the movie more in depth. And I'll give you some time. I'll put in the annotation to jump to the end of the video, so you won't get. We won't be ruined for you. So basically, the first mission there I'm talking about earlier takes place in Lagos, Nigeria. It was being pulled up by Crossbones. He was one of the mercenaries working for Hydra and Captain America: The Winter Soldier. They basically foiled his plan to steal a biological weapon, but after taunting Steve Rogers about Bucky, he's about to activate a suicide vest to take both him and Steve out. But Scarlet Witch uses her power to contain the blast and tries to like levitate it up in the air away from it. But it seems like she seems to lose her concentration, and the blast ends up blowing up a building, which also included diplomats from Wakanda, and it was not caused enough of an international incident as to why the Sokovia Accords were put together. And of course, when former general, now Secretary of State Thunderbolt Ross shows up and shows him all this footage of the damage caused by the Avengers. At first you saw it in the trailers from like the battles of New York, Washington D.C., Sokovia. At first it looked like stock footage from the past movies, but they actually did use like cell phone cameras from people who were collateral damage in it. Like there was cell phone footage of the Hulk jumping from building to building, how a person got crushed by the debris falling on top of that person. When the helicarriers in Captain America 2 crashed into the Potomac River, it's like it caused this like giant tidal wave in which the people who were witnessing this were supposedly drowned by it, and you can tell like, and it has like this more like emotional reaction to it when you see Sam like holding his head down in shame, this realizing like, oh my god, like I never like you realize along with him you never realize like what kind of damage they caused by what they did. And of course they show cell phone footage of Sokovia being levitated, and even the footage from Lagos in which it upsets Scarlet Witch, and that's when Steve says, okay, we get it, that's enough. And it was, and of course even this has this whole conversation with Vision saying that this is at least passive resistance. It won't cause any conflict. If we don't follow this, it will cause conflict. Conflict leads to chaos. And of course, given their experience with the government, Bucky and Sam and Steve are totally against it. They eventually, and that's during, and then he gets a text, message, Steve, finding out that Peggy Carter died in her sleep. And so he and Sam go to attend her funeral, and that's when Agent 13, or Sharon Carter, gives her eulogy and announces that they were, she never told anybody that they were related, and that she was Peggy's niece, and she always asked how she succeeded in a time where women were, were treated as second-class citizens, and Peggy says never compromise when you need to, and if you feel like you don't have to, don't compromise. When people tell you to move, place your footing, like be the tree, or it was something like that, and tell them like, no, you move, and that's what inspires Cap to stand his ground against the Accords. And even though Black Widow comes to see him after the services, and says that maybe it's better to stand together than how we stand together, Steve says that he can't. And when she goes to Vienna to sign the Accords with the other Avengers, that's when the diplomat building gets bombed, and T'Chaka, who was the father of T'Challa, the Black Panther, is killed in the blast, which was actually caused by Helmut Zemo, and framed Bucky for the bombings. And he was actually, and there's also the flashback in the movie to December 16, 1991. And 1991, I remember that was being the date that Tony's parents were killed. And it's presumably when Hydra sent him on a mission to kill the parents, and I guess extract like super soldier. What we find out from Bucky later is like super soldier serums to create more Winter Soldiers. And they were given like 5 people who were put in cryogenic stasis, and they were even stronger and more powerful than Bucky, because they used him as their basically punching bag to see if they were powerful enough to complete their missions. But they were put in cryogenic stasis along with Bucky because they were deemed too dangerous, and Bucky warns that they're the reasons why they're powerful enough to take down the whole country and not even know it. But that was not before Zemo was able to get a book using phrases that would trigger cause Bucky to go into his like Winter Soldier mode while he was taken into custody, and basically goes on this rampage at this base at this joint terrorism task force location in Germany, where Sharon Carter and everybody is. But Bucky eventually escapes. Steve Rogers goes after him, and that's when they learn about the super soldier Hydra program, and they basically have to go find Evan. And that's when they start recruiting Scarlet Witch, Hawkeye, and Ant-Man to help prove their innocence. And that's the thing, they evacuate the Iron Man's team had the airport evacuated, and it's not like some like one line where in Batman v Superman where it's just like, Oh, by the way, it's a good thing that it's a good thing that the it's after 9 o'clock, so the business area is basically closed and nobody's there. As a cynical, hey there, are you happy now? People who are criticizing Man of Steel, kind of thing. And so you would think, and Word of the Fear I had, where it's just like, where they would address all this collateral damage from these big superhero battles, and then this movie would have them getting into this huge superhero battle where there would still be collateral damage, and yet there was every fight scene they managed to avoid it, and they made it like pretty plausible because most of them took place on a small scale, except for the airport battle where it's like we had to see Spider-Man geeking out and being able to hold his own against both Bucky and Sam Wilson, and use his webbing to subdue them. And he's ranting on about the chemical compounds, and he's like, he's like, hey, when it comes to fighting, there's usually not this much talking. And a little banter back and forth between Bucky and Sam, especially when they're like in a car, they're driving around in a car, and Sam's being Bucky's pissed about being in the back seat. He's like, can you move your seat forward? And then they smile noddingly when they see Sharon and Steve make out, which at first I thought came out of nowhere, but they did kind of tease that in Winter Soldier. And I guess I guess even though Steve found out she was a spy, she eventually forgave him, and they were still they're still teasing a ship between them, but didn't go further than that since he was a fugitive. And Sharon didn't want to reveal her, and Sharon didn't want to, reveal her allegiance. Steve wanted to keep her safe, etc. But it was just the battles between, Vision and Scarlet Witch, or like Captain America and, Spider-Man, or just like the big, or like the literally and figuratively big moment where, actually before then, Ant-Man shows up and with a tiny truck and says, hey, use one of these discs, which he uses to enlarge things from Ant-Man. They throw both of those things, it enlarges, and War Machine's engulfed in flames where he just exacerbates. Oh, come on! And Ant-Man says, oh shit, I thought that was a water truck. My bad. And especially, and like I said, the literal big and figurative moment is when Ant-Man essentially grows like 50 feet tall and essentially becomes Giant Man, and to the point where even Tony's like, okay, if there's anybody who has a miraculous superpower that they haven't told me about, now would be a great time to use it. And then he's able to grab Rhodey, and Tony's like, give me back my Rhodey, and he's using an airplane wing to swat people out of the sky, and then of course Spider-Man finally comes in and says hey, you guys remember that old Star Wars movie where they wrapped the when they wrapped the thing around the AT walkers, and he does that same trick to basically help to subdue Ant-Man, and Black Widow is able to stop Black Panther, and basically Sam and Bucky are the only ones that get away in the Quinjet, and Falcon follows them, but because Vision is trying to shoot Sam with the mind gem, he accidentally shoots Rhodey out of the sky, and so both Iron Man and Falcon are going after him trying to catch Rhodey. They don't, and he ends up getting paralyzed, and Sam apologizes, but Iron Man's still pissed that he just blasts him with his repulsor ray, and Vision asks what happened. He says he was distracted because Wanda was hurt. And she had this really cool moment where it's Hawkeye fired an arrow and missed you think he missed Iron Man, and then of course it turns out they open up this garage where all these cars are falling on top of him, and Ant-Man short circuiting Iron Man's gauntlet and stuff like that. And then after going to the Wrap Supermax prison, which is basically an underground prison, not an interdimensional prison like in the comic book, which they obviously can't do, after being berated by all the other people all of the other members of Team Cap are getting locked up, he eventually got evidence that, Helmut Zemo was really the one responsible for the bombings and setting Winter Soldier loose, and basically realized that Cap was right, and he secretly is able to get convince Sam to tell them where they're going. They find out that, so Iron Man follows Sam and Steve and Bucky to Siberia. Black Panther isn't far behind, and that's when Zemo admits to basically manipulating the team, and how he's been studying them and following them, and even Black Panther overhears how it was because he blames the Avengers because the debris that caused by Iron Man and Thor destroying what remains of Sokovia to keep it from becoming like the meteor that Ultron wanted to destroy the world or whatever, that his family was crushed by the debris, and that's all he had to live for is like getting back at them. And even when later on he meets the Black Panther, when he's confronted by him, that he knew that he was just a man, he couldn't actually destroy the Avengers, and that more powerful beings have tried and failed. The best he could do to get back at them was basically just to splinter the team. And the final nail in the coffin was just basically showing the security footage of Bucky brutally murdering Howard and Maria Stark, and that naturally is what naturally just Tony, just sends him flying into a rage, because he's mentioned earlier at some symposium when he's showing off glasses that replay past memories, which, by the way, is that testament to how far the technology has come, because of how the young Robert Downey Jr. looks. It looks like uncanny. It's not like, X-Men Last Stand or X-Men Origins. Like, they legitimately was able to recreate like a younger Robert Downey Jr. and it looks great. But anyway, he basically, because he's repressed almost this like emotions about his parents' death and whatnot, he basically goes into blind rage. He doesn't care what Bucky's reasonings or what he went through. He just wants him dead for what he did. And Steve's doing everything in his power to try to talk Tony down and saying he was brainwashed by Hydra. It wasn't him, but he doesn't care, and he's more than willing to beat up Steve because he's hid the fact that not only did he know that his parents' death was foul play, but even the fact that Bucky was possibly involved. And so that's when it leads to this whole 3-on-1 battle, and that's why I said it was the most Iron Man's anger in that scene was just palpable, and that's why I said in some ways it was the best fight in the movie. And it ends up being, and that's why the fight ends with Iron Man destroying Bucky's metal arm when he tries to rip out the arc reactor, and then Steve using his shield to basically crack the arc reactor so it shuts down his suit. And when with Steve carrying Bucky out, injured Bucky out, Tony rants about how he doesn't deserve the shield. His father made the shield, he doesn't deserve it, and so Steve drops the shield, realizing that he can't carry on this Captain America persona while being a fugitive, and he manages to. He later sends an apology letter to Tony for lying to him about what happened to his parents, and he leaves him a cell phone saying that if he ever needs anything, this is after a physical therapy session with Rhodey, in which Stan Lee comes in as a mailman calling him Tony Stank, and Tony lets him make the jokes about Rhodey's gonna call him Tony Stank from now on, and that Steve says the Avengers are Tony's now, and that but he's able to go to the raft and break the rest of his team out of prison, and they all go and take refuge in Wakanda in the mid-credit scene, and Bucky agrees to go cryogenically freeze himself until he's free of the Hydra brainwashing. And the end credit scene is just Peter Parker talking to his Aunt May, who's played by Marissa Tomei, and even Tony's like pointing out how hot she is, and it's also because of the fact. And apparently, he gets like a spider signal put in one of his, I guess, web shooters thanks to Tony Stark. And I guess that's the thing, is that the more I thought about it, it just seems like Tony did become more like the antagonist and more of an antagonist, and instead of looking at it from both sides. And the more I thought about it, Cap was like recruiting people into. I mean, with Iron Man, having Vision keep Scarlet Witch captive at the Avengers compound against her will, and recruiting Peter Parker, basically a child soldier, into their war. But then, of course, like Steve Rogers was recruiting people who had like families to leave, having families to leave behind, and now they can't see them indefinitely. Hawkeye and Ant-Man in particular, but also, I guess, getting back to the fact you can't blame Tony for wanting to kill Bucky, and Steve for wanting to save Bucky, and also I think I started to realize the more I thought about it, it was just like Pepper Potts broke up with him since the events of Age of Ultron. As a result of the events of Age of Ultron, he was guilty because a mom yelled at him for his son dying for doing volunteer work in Sokovia prior to the battle in Age of Ultron, and he lost his parents, so the Avengers is all he has left, and so signing the Accords is basically his way of trying to keep this pseudo family he has together, instead of like splitting apart over it, which made it a lot more understandable. And Helmut Zemo, I mean, some people said like he was like useless and didn't really add anything to the story, which I disagree. And I don't even say he's so much of a puppet master per se. He just sort of like nudged people in certain directions. He kind of just like fanned the flame, so to speak. He might not be as like theatrical, or may have the charisma of Loki or past Loki or Ultron, but he still managed to be a more interesting character, at least in this incarnation, because he has nothing to do with Hydra in this incarnation. He was basically a member of the Sokovian army, and he just wanted to avenge his family's death, and he knew that like he said, he knew he couldn't destroy them, but he knew he could like tear them apart. Like, he succeeded where he did what Loki, a god, technically an alien, failed to do, which is tear the Avengers apart, and which Ultron talked about doing, which is just, I guess, was just wishful thinking or something, or I think it was just a line from the trailer, but I don't know if he ever said that in the movie. But all in all, this definitely, it's hard to say whether or not this movie is better or worse than Winter Soldier, because this Winter Soldier, that was like a big game changer, and it took Captain America out of his comfort zone and redefined and took elements of the Marvel universe and structured into this political conspiracy thriller. This one just felt like a huge culmination of a culmination of not only just Captain America movies, but other Marvel movies in the past coming to a head. And this is also a game changer in the sense that the event. I mean, a lot of the Avengers, I don't know if like the Avengers are probably all but disbanded. I mean, most of them are either fugitives. I mean, Black Widow's like, Black Widow's disappeared. I don't know about where it happened to Vision. I don't remember what they said what happened with Vision. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty much disbanded, I guess, at least until Infinity Wars, and so I guess we get to spend more time, kind of exploring the different parts of the Marvel universe and the aftermath and all of that. I mean, it felt like the stakes in here were like much smaller, and I don't know how much aftermath we're going to see in future movies up until Infinity Wars, because And this felt like the sequel that Joss Whedon wanted to make, because he felt like he did want to make a movie that was smaller in scale and more emotionally fulfilling. But then, of course, studio mandates is why he wasn't able to do that with Age of Ultron. But this movie kind of pulled it off, did what Age of Ultron failed and was meant to do in the originally, and which, like I said, it managed to be a good Captain America and a great Avengers sequel. Totally worth the money. Totally worth get your money's worth. One of my favorite Marvel movies. I don't know if I'm ready to say it's one of my. It might be my favorite Marvel movie. Period. In the MCU. It's. I think I'm ready to say that. I love this movie, and I definitely want to see this again. What do you guys think of Civil War? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. If you like this video, like, share, and subscribe. And is there anything I forgot to talk about? Feel free to leave that in the comments down below, and I will talk to you guys soon. Take care.